Pierce Brosnan, the man who once embodied the unshakable elegance of James Bond in the legendary film GoldenEye, has been loved for decades, not only for the place he holds in cinematic history, but also for the calm and unyielding dignity he has carried through a lifetime of storms. He has stood beside graves no husband or father should ever have to face, yet each time he has emerged from the wreckage with pride, strength, and a heart still willing to love. He held the hand of his first wife as the ruthless grip of ovarian cancer stole her life at the age of 43. And then, years later, that same merciless disease came for his daughter at just 41, tearing away yet another piece of his soul. And now, at 71, an even deeper darkness is closing in, a darkness striking at the very heart of his world, threatening to drag him back into the abyss he has fought his whole life to escape. And what he is preparing to do next has left those closest to him deeply concerned. Before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate Pierce Brosnan? Your opinion truly matters. Every story of grief has a beginning. For Pierce Brosnan, it started in a quiet Irish town, with the sound of a door closing and a father who never returned. He was born on May 16, 1953, in Drogheda, Ireland, into a world without wealth, without legacy, and, almost immediately, without the man who had given him his name. His father, Thomas Brosnan, a carpenter by trade, left when Pierce was still too young to remember. No tragic accident, no farewell, just a disappearance that left behind only silence. "I never knew his face, never heard his voice," Pierce would say many years later, his words carrying the calm weight of a wound that time had never managed to heal. His mother, May, worked tirelessly as a nurse, fighting to build some kind of life for the two of them. But in 1957, when Pierce was just 4, she made the most painful choice a mother could, leaving Ireland for London to find work, promising it would be only for a short while. That short while became 7 long years. In her absence, Pierce drifted between homes, first with his grandparents in Navan, then with an aunt and uncle in Trim, each place with its own rules, its own voices, its own air of impermanence. He learned early to stay quiet, to stay out of the way, to be the boy who watched more than he spoke. Teachers noticed something in him, a brightness buried behind the eyes of a child who was always staring out the window, as if searching for something he couldn't name. In 1964, at age 11, his mother returned, with a new husband, William Carmichael. William was gentle, patient, never trying to take another man's place. He taught Pierce how to fish, how to fix what was broken, how to trust again. And yet, for a boy who had grown up in fragments, even love could feel like something you might lose if you held it too tightly. That same year, William took him to the cinema to see Goldfinger. Sean Connery's James Bond filled the screen, strong, confident, untouchable. "That's the man I want to be," Pierce thought, feeling a spark ignite deep inside him. By 16, that spark had carried him to London's St. Martin's School of Art, chasing a dream of painting inspired by Bacon and Freud, surviving on toast and tea while classmates lived in comfort. Acting wasn't even a thought, until one day in 1971, when he wandered into a theater workshop and saw a fire eater practicing. On impulse, he asked to try. That single moment rewrote his future. The troupe saw presence, grit, and the quiet weight of a life already tested. Soon, Pierce was at the Drama Centre London, enduring one of the most demanding acting programs in the country. More than half his classmates dropped out. He stayed, working odd jobs, studying Shakespeare, training in mime and circus arts. He didn't come from privilege, but he carried something far more enduring: the relentless hunger of a boy who had begun with nothing and had sworn never to end there. Pierce Brosnan's path to the screen didn't begin with dreams of Hollywood. It began with a chance encounter that quietly altered his destiny. As a teenage art student at St. Martin's School of Art, he imagined a future with brushes and canvases, not cameras. But one afternoon in 1971, wandering through the city, he stumbled into a small theater workshop and found himself watching a fire eater rehearse for a show. Instead of walking away, he asked to try. That single impulsive moment revealed something no one had expected: an intensity, a presence, and the weight of a life already tested. The troupe invited him to join, and soon Brosnan was accepted into the Drama Centre London, a crucible where more than half the students left under the relentless pressure. He stayed, working odd jobs, mastering Shakespeare, mime, and even circus skills, holding on with the hunger of someone who had no safety net. In 1976, after years of demanding training, he landed his first professional role in the stage thriller Wait Until Dark, portraying a figure who lingered in the shadows, ready to act at any moment. A year later came Tennessee Williams' The Red Devil Battery Sign, a play that had faltered in America but found new life in London through his magnetic performance. Film work followed in 1980, though the start was humble. Less than 30 seconds on screen with Elizabeth Taylor in The Mirror Cracked, for a paycheck of just £50. That same year, he appeared in The Long Good Friday with Helen Mirren and Bob Hoskins, again in a minor role, but in a film that would become a cult classic. He was building momentum inch by inch, quietly, determinedly. Then, in 1982, fate stepped in once more. Auditioning for a small background role in NBC's new detective series Remington Steele, Brosnan was instead offered the lead. At 29, virtually unknown in America, he was nothing like the seasoned American charmer the role was originally written for. But once he walked in, the part became his. When Remington Steele premiered on October 1, 1982, it drew 15.6 million weekly viewers, aired in over 80 countries, and made Brosnan a household name. Yet fame brought its own challenge. Almost immediately, critics and fans began calling him the next James Bond, a label that would follow him for over a decade. By the early 1980s, Pierce Brosnan was no longer just an up-and-coming actor. He was already being whispered about as the next James Bond. In 1983, those whispers reached the right ears. Bond producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli saw him visiting the set of For Your Eyes Only, where his wife, actress Cassandra Harris, had a role. Turning to someone nearby, Broccoli remarked, "If he can act, he's my guy." It seemed like destiny knocking, but timing had other plans. Roger Moore, nearing the end of his tenure as 007, was persuaded to return for one more film with an unprecedented offer, and Brosnan's first chance slipped away. 3 years later, in 1986, history repeated itself. Remington Steele was cancelled, freeing Brosnan just as the Bond role opened again. Negotiations began, but before anything was signed, NBC unexpectedly revived the show for another season. Bound by contract, Brosnan had to watch the role go to his friend Timothy Dalton. In public, he stayed gracious. In private, the disappointment ran deep. For the next 8 years, what fans now call the Lost Bond years, he kept working steadily. Intense spy thrillers like The Fourth Protocol, atmospheric dramas like Nomads, and even light-hearted Diet Coke commercials in tuxedos, playfully nodding to the role that kept eluding him. Then, in 1994, The call finally came. This time, he wasn't a newcomer chasing a break. He was a seasoned performer who had waited, endured, and was ready. GoldenEye became a high-stakes test for a struggling studio and a fading franchise. If it failed, Bond could fade with it. Brosnan delivered. The film earned $353 million worldwide, revived the series, and reintroduced Bond to a new generation. He performed most of his own stunts, including a breathtaking 220-meter dam bungee jump considered too risky for insurance coverage. 3 more Bond films followed, grossing a combined $1.2 billion and making him the defining 007 for millions of fans. Even offers like Indiana Jones from Steven Spielberg couldn't tempt him away from the role he had fought so long to play. But in 2004, at the height of his success, it ended abruptly. While filming After the Sunset, he received a brief phone call. "You were a great James Bond. Thank you. Goodbye." There was no warning, no detailed explanation, only the news that younger candidates had been quietly considered for 2 years. His final Bond outing, Die Another Day, had been the franchise's highest-grossing film at $431 million. But it no longer mattered. Casting directors began to see him as too Bond for other roles. Offers dwindled, longtime staff were let go, and he entered a period of quiet, personal difficulty. Years later, his children would recall the first time they saw him cry when the trailer for Casino Royale played. What he lost that day wasn't only a part, it was a part of himself. Years later, Brosnan would look back, not with bitterness, but with a quiet gratitude for every turn in the road. The early rejections, the near misses, the triumphs and the heartbreaks. They had shaped not just the actor the world knew, but the man he became. In the end, the true legacy of his Bond years wasn't just in the box office numbers or the iconic lines. It was in proving to himself and to the world that resilience can turn even the longest wait into a defining moment. At a time when the world saw him as unshakable, the man in the tuxedo, the hero who always won, Pierce Brosnan was fighting a battle far more real, far more cruel than anything on screen. Behind the flashbulbs and red carpets, his heart belonged to one person, Cassandra Harris. Long before Bond scripts and box office triumphs, there was this elegant, quick-witted actress whose presence could light up any room. They met in the late 1970s, when his career was still uncertain and hers already established. Cassandra was raising 2 children, Charlotte and Christopher, from a previous marriage. She was poised, magnetic, and carried a quiet resilience that drew people in. Most men might have hesitated at stepping into an instant family. Pierce didn't pause for a heartbeat. What held him wasn't simply her beauty, though she was striking. It was the warmth she radiated, the way she made the world feel less lonely. With her children, he didn't arrive as a visitor. He stepped in as if he had always been meant to be there. They married in 1980, and 3 years later welcomed their son, Sean. In family photographs from that time, Brosnan's smile isn't the polished charm of a rising star, it's the deep, grounded contentment of a man who had finally found home. He would later reflect, "I wasn't a father. I was just Pierce. And then I became Daddy." That joy made what came next all the more heartbreaking. In 1987, while working overseas, Cassandra began to feel a deep fatigue and a persistent ache she couldn't explain. At first, they thought it was travel exhaustion. Back in London, the truth came with merciless clarity: ovarian cancer already advanced. Brosnan later said it felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. One moment, they were living their everyday life. The next, everything was shattered. From that day, their lives were consumed by the cold, endless corridors of hospitals, the metallic smell of chemotherapy wards, and the quiet dread between each test result. Over 4 relentless years, Cassandra endured multiple surgeries and grueling months of treatment. The disease took her strength, her hair, and her energy, but it could never take her dignity. She met every challenge with unflinching courage, demanding the truth, making her own decisions, and facing each day with grace that left everyone in awe. Pierce called himself the quiet partner, always there, holding her hand, offering steadiness when no answer could ease the pain. But inside, he was breaking. At home, Sean, still just a little boy, would sometimes appear in a toy doctor's coat, clutching plastic stethoscopes, treating his mother with imaginary medicine. It was innocent, sweet, and utterly devastating, because they both knew make-believe couldn't change reality. Some nights, when the house was still and the world felt far away, Cassandra would speak softly to him, not about the illness, but about love, life, and the strange peace that comes when you stop running from the truth. Near the end, she whispered, "Please, darling, don't worry. It's just a life coming to rest." It was tender, and it was cruel. A final gift of strength from a woman who refused to be remembered only for her illness. On December 28, 1991, just one day after their 11th wedding anniversary, Cassandra passed away at the age of 43. Pierce was by her side with Christopher. Charlotte, away in London, spoke to her over the phone. Sean, only 8, was in the house but too young to understand the finality of that quiet moment. Christmas had just passed, but the air in their home was heavy, still, and unbearably silent. In the days after, Pierce moved like a man on autopilot, funeral arrangements to make, people to comfort, 3 children to somehow keep steady. He didn't cry in front of them, not yet. Instead, he became the anchor, even as the weight of grief threatened to pull him under. At night, and on many nights that followed, he would walk the halls, pausing at each child's doorway, listening for the steady rhythm of their breathing, as if to remind himself that something, anything, was still safe. Grief didn't fade. It rooted itself into the architecture of his life. It lingered in quiet mornings, in the sound of laughter that carried her voice, in milestones she would never see. Even at the height of his career, behind the perfect smile and the tailored suits, lived a man carrying a private sorrow the world could not see. Years later, when the trailer for Casino Royale played, the first Bond film without him, his children saw him cry for the first time. He would sum it up with words as stark as they were eternal. "Some people carry pain like a badge. I carry it quietly, because it's part of me now. It always will be." He had believed that losing Cassandra was the deepest wound a soul could bear, that no other blow could ever match the day he watched the woman he loved more than life itself slip away. But life had not finished with him. It came back, cold and deliberate, as if it had been waiting. And when it struck, it did not simply reopen old scars, it tore them wider, forcing him to relive every moment he had prayed never to face again. This time, grief did not creep in to haunt the past. It came for the future, and once again, it wore the same merciless face: ovarian cancer. But now, 22 years after it had stolen his wife, the same relentless disease came back, not to haunt the past, but to take his daughter. Charlotte was luminous, warm, resilient. She carried her mother's grace in her smile, her kindness in the way she touched a hand, her steadiness in moments of chaos, and hidden deep within her, unspoken and unseen, was the same fatal shadow written into her DNA. The same disease that had already stolen so much from their family returned like a predator retracing its own bloody path, striking the next generation without mercy. She was only 40 when the first signs came. Slight fatigue, a vague ache, nothing to sound alarms. But Pierce felt the shift immediately. He knew this rhythm too well, the quiet before devastation, the air thick with dread. When the tests confirmed what he had already feared, it was not shock that crushed him. It was a suffocating, bone-deep despair. The sensation of being dragged back to the same cliff he had once been thrown from, knowing the fall would be just as long, just as merciless. Charlotte, like her mother, met the disease head-on. For 3 unrelenting years, she endured surgeries, rounds of chemotherapy, and the long purgatory of waiting rooms, places that smelled of antiseptic and resignation. Each treatment stole more of her strength, yet her resolve burned on. Her anchor was her 2 children, Isabella, 15, and Lucas, 8, watching her fade just as she had once watched Cassandra. It was a cruel mirror image, history looping with surgical precision. She refused pity. What she asked for was time. Time to show her children that love could outlast pain. Time to leave them with memories of courage, not just of sickness. So in June 2013, with the cancer advancing like a tide that could not be turned, she did something extraordinary. She put on a white dress, stood tall against the weight of her body's failing strength, and married Alex, the man who had stood unwavering beside her. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a final stand, a declaration that love would have the last word. She smiled through the pain, her hands trembling, her eyes bright with both joy and the unspoken knowledge of what was to come. 2 weeks later, she was gone. June 28, 2013. A quiet Friday in London that carved itself into Pierce's bones. Charlotte passed surrounded by her husband, her children, and her brothers, Christopher and Sean. And there it was, the cruel symmetry, almost too exact to bear. Charlotte died at 41, Cassandra at 43. Lucas was 8, the same age Sean had been when Cassandra died. Isabella was 15, the same age Charlotte had been when her mother's illness was first revealed. It was as if grief had a blueprint, returning to etch the same wounds at the same ages, with surgical cruelty. Once more, Pierce stood in the place no parent should ever be, burying a child, burying a future. He tried to be strong for his grandchildren, but some pain defies language. It is not cinematic. It is not poetic. It is a hollowing silence that seeps into the marrow, that steals the shape of the days to come. In 2014, at a Stand Up to Cancer fundraiser, the spotlight found him. It did not glamorize, it exposed. His voice was steady, but each word carried the weight of decades carved by loss. I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie, as ovarian cancer took her life much too soon, he said. And just last year, I held the hand of my funny, wonderful daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched inherited disease. The room went still. There was nothing to add. Some grief doesn't fade, it multiplies, echoing across time, embedding itself into every breath. Pierce Brosnan does not wear that pain as a badge. It has become part of his very structure, woven into him as unyielding, as unshakable, and as permanent as bone. He had thought Charlotte's death was the final blow, that after losing both his wife and his daughter to the same merciless illness, there was nothing left for life to take. The symmetry of their departures, years apart but bound by the same cruel disease, had left him hollow. There are some losses that feel like a theft, and others that feel like the ground itself has been erased from under you. He had endured both. And yet, through all of this heartbreak, just when it seemed the weight of loss might break him for good, there was Keely, the woman he met in 1994 in the unlikeliest of settings, a beach party in Cabo San Lucas. It was just months before he would officially become James Bond, but fame wasn't what defined him in that moment. He was still a man living in quiet grief, not seeking romance, just trying to keep moving forward. She wasn't part of the past. She was his future, his survival, his second chance. Keely was a journalist, warm, wise, uninterested in the spotlight. She saw not the tuxedoed icon or the rising Bond star, but the man who still carried silences too heavy to name. And he saw in her a stillness he hadn't known in years. In those early days, she didn't try to erase his grief or force joy into spaces where it didn't belong. She simply stayed. Through sleepless nights, through the anniversaries that felt like open wounds, she stayed. When Charlotte fell ill nearly 2 decades later, dragging Pierce back into the echo of his first great loss, Keely became his shield. She held the house together. She held him together. And she held space for his pain, without demanding he put it into words. They married in 2001 in an 800-year-old abbey, surrounded by friends, family, and the kind of beauty that makes time feel momentarily still. For him, that day was more than a celebration. It was a declaration that despite everything he had lost, love still had a place in his life. It was the beginning of a chapter where he could be a father again, this time to the 2 children they would have together, Dylan and Paris. In them, he found not a replacement for what was gone, but a continuation of his role as a parent, a role that had always defined him more deeply than any film could. Keely's love was not loud or showy. It was in the way she made birthdays a priority, how she filled the house with warmth so that laughter could still echo even on the hardest days. It was in the way she never asked him to get over it, but instead helped him live alongside the absence. When Charlotte passed away in 2013, Keely was there, steady, unyielding, protecting the fragile threads of a family that had already been through too much. She didn't try to replace what had been lost. She became the anchor that kept him from drifting entirely into grief. Over the years, the outside world would turn its gaze on them in ways that were not always kind. After the births of their children, tabloids targeted Keely's appearance with relentless scrutiny. But Pierce never wavered. He defended her openly and fiercely, dismissing the criticism and speaking instead of the beauty he saw. "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes." That steadfast loyalty was the same he had shown in every part of his life. It was simply who he was. In 2024, at the age of 61, after decades of enduring the glare of public judgment, Keely made headlines of her own, not for her appearance in the eyes of others, but for a deeply personal transformation. She lost over 100 pounds, not as an answer to criticism, but as a gift to her own health. "My body has survived love, children, and sorrow," she wrote. "Now I honor it by moving forward, stronger." For Pierce, this was no revelation. He had always known her strength. The world was simply seeing what he had cherished all along. He has often said, "Keely saved me. She gave me the will to keep going." In her, he didn't find an escape from grief, but the endurance to live with it. Not a distraction from the past, but meaning in the present. After all the roles he had played, Bond, Remington Steele, action heroes, tragic lovers, The greatest role he grew into was one she helped him embrace: husband, father, survivor. Even now, when he speaks of Cassandra or Charlotte, his voice lowers, his gaze drifts. There are absences time cannot fill. The loss is not something he has ever moved on from. It is something he carries, silently, every day. But in Keely, he found a place to set that weight down when it became too heavy. A soft landing after a lifetime of free falls. She never tried to fill the silence left by those who were gone. She simply taught him how to live with it, how to find joy again, even if it trembled at the edges. And through every high and low, she stayed. That, more than anything else, has been the quiet miracle of his life. He had weathered storms most men could never imagine, buried the love of his life, stood helpless as his daughter fought the same merciless illness, rebuilt himself from grief again and again. He thought he understood loss, but nothing prepared him for the quiet, calculated betrayal that came not from strangers, but from the very institution he had helped revive. After 4 blockbuster Bond films, after GoldenEye resurrected a fading franchise and re-established 007 as a global force, after risking his body in dangerous stunts and carrying the weight of an iconic legacy with unwavering loyalty, Pierce Brosnan believed he had earned his place in that tuxedo for years to come. Then, in 2004, while filming in the Bahamas, the phone rang. The call lasted just 47 seconds. No warning, no conversation, no gratitude. Only a voice on the other end saying, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The line went dead, and with it, the chapter that had defined his professional life. What hurt most wasn't losing the role. It was learning the truth afterward. For 2 years, producers had been auditioning his replacement in secret, letting him believe the future was still his, even as they prepared his exit. It was a wound deeper than a lost job. It was the shattering of trust. In the days that followed, the consequences hit like falling dominoes. 3 major film deals vanished almost overnight. His value in Hollywood collapsed, his salary offers plummeting from $12 million to just 3. Studios began labeling him "Too Bond," an image so iconic it now became a prison, locking him out of roles instead of opening doors. The impact was brutal and swift. He was forced to let go of 12 loyal staff members. The man who had stood unshaken through personal tragedy now found himself drowning in a different kind of grief. The grief of erasure. This wasn't a headline or a press release. This was waking up each morning feeling as though the world had moved on and left him behind. For a man whose identity had been forged in survival, this loss didn't just bruise, it broke something fundamental. His son would later recall catching him in tears when the trailer for Casino Royale was released. It wasn't envy, it wasn't anger, it was a hollow ache. The kind that comes when you see someone else wearing the life you had built, and you realize it's gone forever. In interviews years later, Brosnan would speak of that period as one of the darkest stretches of his life. Not because James Bond had ended for him, but because with it went his sense of purpose, his anchor in a career that had given him meaning after so much personal tragedy. When survival has been your defining role, every loss carries the echo of all the others. And for Pierce Brosnan, this felt like losing everything all over again. Not every kind of loss is marked by black clothes and a graveside. Some are slow, invisible to the outside world, unfolding over years until you realize that someone you love has been slipping away in plain sight. For Pierce Brosnan, that kind of grief came in the form of watching Christopher drift from the life they once shared. Christopher was Cassandra's son from her first marriage. a boy Pierce met when he was still finding his own place in the world. The connection was instant. Pierce didn't see step or half. He saw a son. He adopted Christopher, gave him his name, and stepped into his life as a father. Not just in title, but in action. They bonded through film sets, through laughter, through the simple routines of family life. Christopher often worked alongside him in the early years, carrying cameras, learning the rhythms of storytelling. There was a time when they were inseparable. But when Cassandra passed away, something in the family's foundation cracked. Charlotte held the pieces together with grace. Sean leaned on Pierce for strength. But Christopher carried his grief differently, quietly, heavily, and in ways that no one could fully reach. Over time, the pain turned inward. Struggles with addiction began to creep in, not as moral failings, but as battles with shadows that refused to let go. What started quietly became harder to hide. Legal troubles, near misses, moments where the weight of it all nearly claimed his life. Pierce tried everything a father could. Rehab, long talks, countless chances, even just sitting beside him in silence. But the truth was cruel. Love alone couldn't pull him back. In a rare moment of honesty years later, Pierce admitted, "Christopher is still very lost. I know where he is, but he's having a hard life. He knows how to get out. He doesn't want to." There was no anger in his voice, just the ache of a man who had run out of ways to rescue someone who didn't yet want to be saved. Eventually, for his own survival and for the stability of the rest of the family, Pierce made the hardest choice a parent can make: to step back, not to cut ties, never to stop loving, but to love from a distance, hoping the space might one day lead to a return. Years passed. Christopher faded from public view. When he reappeared, older and frailer, the change was stark. For Pierce, it was another kind of funeral, one without a ceremony. To lose a child to death is an agony no parent should face, but to lose them to life, while they are still out there somewhere, breathing and walking, is its own quiet devastation. Pierce has never turned this pain into spectacle. On Father's Day in 2022, he posted a rare message including Christopher's name, a simple act that spoke volumes. The love never left. It never will. And maybe that's the hardest truth about this kind of grief. Some goodbyes aren't spoken. They are lived day after day, in the silence between phone calls, in the distance, across years, and in the stubborn, unshakable hope that one day the story isn't over. The curtain never truly falls on some stories. For Pierce Brosnan, the current chapter of his life is not about box office numbers or the flash of paparazzi bulbs. It's about meaning. After decades marked by unimaginable personal losses, professional upheavals, and the kind of grief that can hollow out even the strongest hearts, he did not choose retreat. Instead, he chose to rebuild, to stand up, and to make the years ahead count. Today, the man once defined by the tuxedo and the gun is better recognized by the brush in his hand, the causes he champions, and the family that surrounds him. For nearly 2 decades, Brosnan's primary base was Orchid House, his Thai-inspired beachfront estate in Malibu, which he and Keely built after purchasing the land around 2000. In 2020, they sold it for a reported $100 million, a record for the area. Now, he divides his time between a coastal home in Malibu and their longtime retreat in Kauai, Hawaii. Both places give him what he calls the horizon, a view of the ocean that has always been a source of calm and clarity. These are not just houses. They are sanctuaries filled with life, walls lined with his own paintings, gardens he tends himself, and rooms that echo with family laughter. Privacy here is sacred. Mornings often start with coffee on the terrace with Keely, followed by barefoot walks along the shore, the salt air softening the edges of life's harder memories. Family remains the center of his orbit. With Keely, his partner since 1994 and wife since 2001, he has built a home anchored by love, stability, and mutual respect. Their two sons, Dylan and Paris, are carving creative careers in music, modeling, and the arts. His older children from his life with Cassandra, Sean and Christopher, remain part of a family web marked by tragedy in places, but held together by unshakable bonds. Pierce is also a devoted grandfather, cherishing time with Charlotte's children, Isabella and Lucas. Milestones are marked quietly, often in gatherings far from public view, where the most important guests are not photographers, but the people who've weathered life's storms with him. At 72, his health is something he tends to with both discipline and gratitude. He follows a diet rich in fresh produce and seafood, limits processed foods, and practices moderation. His exercise is steady and sustainable. Morning swims in the Pacific, long coastal walks, yoga, and occasional strength training. His aim is not only to stay fit for work, but to sustain the energy needed for family life and the causes he supports. Creatively, Brosnan remains active. Though more selective now, he takes roles that interest him, whether in high-profile streaming releases, indie dramas, or lighter action fare. Off-screen, painting remains his deepest creative outlet, one he first turned to during Cassandra's illness as a form of therapy. His abstract works, often rich in color and texture, have been exhibited and auctioned for charitable causes. Financially secure, with a net worth estimated in the tens of millions, Brosnan is not driven by accumulation, but by contribution. As a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, he has championed children's rights and disaster relief efforts. With Keely, he has supported environmental organizations such as Greenpeace and the Natural Resources Defense Council, advocating for clean oceans, wildlife protection, and climate justice. Cancer awareness and research remain deeply personal missions. He continues to fundraise, speak publicly, and make private contributions in memory of Cassandra and Charlotte. Though firmly grounded in the present, the past walks beside him. The absences of Cassandra and Charlotte are not wounds that have healed, but presences that have changed shape, woven into his life's fabric. Keely has been central to that transformation, creating a home where joy and sorrow can exist without negating each other. Physically, time has left its mark. Silver hair, a more deliberate stride. But these are not losses. They are the natural evidence of a life fully lived. Public appearances are now chosen with care, often to promote a project or bring attention to a cause. As for the future, Brosnan shows no sign of stepping away entirely. There are scripts awaiting his decision, paintings in progress, and family trips on the calendar. While he has not spoken publicly about a will or estate plan, his life's work makes one truth clear. His most enduring legacy will not be a single role or a fortune, but the resilience he has modeled in the face of loss, and the way he has transformed that resilience into art, advocacy, and love. He once summed it up in a way that could serve as the epilogue to his life story. Life has to go on. And if it does, you better find something worth living for. For Pierce Brosnan, that something is no longer about escaping danger on screen. It's about confronting the real-world dangers that threaten our planet, our families, and our shared future. It's about ensuring that even the hardest beginnings can still lead to hopeful endings. And perhaps That is the greatest lesson in Pierce Brosnan's journey, that even after loss, love, and purpose can carry us forward. Which chapter of his story speaks most to you? Share your thoughts below, and if this story inspired you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can survive anything.